Priorities in the Public Sector. I'd like to invite on stage CA Sudhir Soni, the moderator of this session. Kindly come up on stage, sir. Sudhir ji is the head of audit with BSR and Company. I would also like to invite the distinguished panelist. Please welcome on stage Mr. Kesavan Srinivasan, Deputy Comptroller and Auditor General and Chairman of the Government Accounting Standards Advisory Board, GAZAB. Please welcome on stage Mr. Carruthers, Chair with the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, IPSASB. Please welcome on stage Mr. Srinivas Gurazada, Global Lead Public Financial Management with the World Bank. Welcome, sir. And the last panelist is Mr. Joseph Owolabi. Kindly come up on the stage. Incoming President with the Association of Chartered Certified Accountants. So you all will agree that the public sector is an essential part of every economy, and the accountants who are working in the public sector, they play a pivotal role in advising governments, directing expenditure in priority areas, controlling and accounting for funds, and ultimately they reinforce the trust in public service and spending. So this session is going to explore key strategic issues for public sector in the context of an unprecedented confluence of global concerns which threaten our lives and existence, where the need for greater transparency, accountability, and quality decision-making has never been greater. So let's start the session on public sector priorities, trust, sustainability, and accountability. I pass it over to the moderator, Mr. Sudhir Soni, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. A few years back, the credo that we used to hear was maximum governance and minimum government. And there was an expected trend that the role of governments would, over a period of time, reduce. Since then, we of course had the COVID pandemic. We have the geopolitical situation in Europe, and that's been followed by unbridled inflation, hardening of interest rates. And what we are seeing that the role of government has in fact become increasingly even more important and possibly will only grow as against an expected reduction. With so many pressing issues that governments have to deal with, how do decision makers prioritize amongst the different issues that they encounter to serve their citizens best? That is the role, the important role that public finance management is playing. If we see government debt as a percentage of GDP, that has now, there are at least 25 countries that have a debt about 3% of 300% of GDP, which was zero in the 1990s. And so such a significant change that is there brings greater focus to the role of better public finance management. With these challenges, the pandemic, volatile markets, climate change, sustainable development, public finance management is severely challenged. Let me start with you, Srinivas. How effective do you think public finance management systems have been in helping government respond to these crises? Can we get a mic here, please?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Namaskar. It's indeed such a great delight flying in all over from Washington, D.C. to the World Congress of Accountants 2022, the Mahakumbh Mela of accountants all over gathering here in Mumbai, organized my own alma mater, Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Delighted to be part of this great accounting community and also the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India. Friends, PFM, Public Financial Management, is very simple. How government gets money, how it spends money. That's it. And this is what you see in my hand right now. PEFA, Public Expenditure and Financial Accountability. A gold standard PFM framework, a framework used in 155 countries by governments, central governments, state governments, local authorities, to assess their own financial management systems and to measure their progress. Now, this assessment is done on a scale of A to D over various parameters, A being the highest and D being the lowest. I have a question for all of you. Assuming all these 155 countries, PEFA assessment scores are added, if we try to get something called World PEFA score, World PFM score, since this is World Congress, what do you think would be the World PEFA score? Any guesses? A, B, I can hear you from here. Do I hear A's? It is C. It is C, the aggregate score of all PFM systems putting together using all the countries, it's C. It gives us two messages. First, C means obviously you have A and B to make progress, so there is huge scope for improvement. Two, C is not bad. C indicates basic level of performance of PFM systems already in place. To the question how well during COVID-19 PFM systems have evolved. Friends, we all agree, we know the doctors have done tremendous work during COVID-19. The scientists have delivered. But what we forget is the government's COVID-19 response would never have been successful without the public financial management systems, without the role of accountants. And we accountants really contributed in big deal, for which in this world conference, we really need to compliment ourselves. Congratulations to everyone for being such wonderful accountants supporting COVID-19. Colleagues, if I go to, as I said, there are issues, there are many strengths, but there are weaknesses. Now let me just pick two weaknesses to talk about. Many of you would have heard in your own countries, in your own governments, the prime ministers, presidents, finance ministers, chief ministers saying during COVID-19, we spend X percentage of GDP. We are investing a lot on COVID-19. Now, a question, think for yourself, your own country. I am calling it as maybe Wakanda or Mahishmati of Bahubali fame. What do you think is the expenditure of the government on COVID-19 response? Do you know how much your country spend or your state spend on COVID-19? Probably it's difficult. You will see numbers. Now, the problem is at the core of it. Where should this number come from? The expenditure. If it is in a company, it would come from the financial statements. Whereas in governments, the game is completely different. So it is very difficult to even get to know how much is spent on COVID-19 by governments. That would be perhaps one problem that I would like to mention as during COVID-19 as we make progress. Second one, as COVID-19 hit, what was happening is governments were able to trace the money, but not only at, for example, this pen. There is money spent on this pen. That is known to government. But what is not known is whether this money is spent towards COVID-19 or not. What is the impact? All of us know health sector benefited. Health sector is one of the important areas during COVID-19 process. And my colleagues in the health ministry, many of them ask, hey, Srini, what is happening here? The budgets for health seem to be increasing, money is coming down. Why is that the case? Normal expenditure gets counted, the COVID-19 expenditure gets counted as health sector expenditure, which means the overall money spent is getting affected. Now, why is all this happening? To close this particular section, very simple. Where are we as accountants? It is the accounting profession's job to get this right. We have done good job, but still, where are we? Countries all over in the world are still in a progress from cash to accrual basis accounting. Colleagues, first year BCom syllabus, accounting means accrual accounting. How much of accrual accounting is in governments? Every company, a small trader follows accrual accounting. But in governments, it's still a process. We are saying only a small percentage of migrated, which means we don't know the assets, we don't know the liabilities, we don't know the complete picture of income and expenditure based on which it's not only for the public, the government itself doesn't have the information needed. And that's where I think we as accounting community need to scale up and work with the governments to get countries move into accrual accounting. Thank you.
Thanks, Srinivas. So Ian, that seems to be a challenge to you, because what Srinivas is saying is, and let me ask you the question, do you think the IPSAs have kept pace with the complexities of public finance management? And I think Srinivas has provided a few examples. Consistency of recording expenditure over COVID, or comparability of data which is provided across governments. To Ian.
So, I mean, I would argue that public financial management has always been complex. I think governments provide a huge range of services. They provide them not only in their own right, but they provide them through partnerships and through collaborations with other bodies. So I think public sector finance has always been complex. Okay, maybe you have a few more public-private partnerships around and so on, but inherently this is complex stuff. Now, I think, I'd entirely endorse what Srini was saying there, that, really to understand where you are at the moment, you need good, high-quality accrual information. You need to know, where are we now? Where do we want to get to in terms of addressing the impacts of the pandemic, sovereign debt crisis, and so on? And then we need a plan for how do we get there. Now, what my board, the International Public Sector Accounting Standards Board, is set the financial reporting standards to help people with better quality information for decision making, and then to be accountable for how the money that they raise from all of us is actually being spent. And I think in setting those standards, there is always a debate that you encounter, which is, to what extent is government the same as the private sector? To what extent is it different? And people will be at different spaces on the spectrum in terms of where they actually are. And that's really where my board has to strike a balance between drawing on the literature that the International Accounting Standards Board has produced for the corporate sector, and actually addressing public sector specific issues. And over the last few years, we've had a very big agenda, because we spent a number of years working on our conceptual framework, really trying to work out, well, what is it that, what are the special issues around public sector finance? How do you actually address them? And that's coming particularly from the range of services provided, the long time frames, the fact that services are provided not in a profit environment a lot of the time. So we've partly been focusing on very big conceptual issues like social benefits. Are the sort of pensions and benefits that are provided by the state to the population as a whole, are those actually a liability or are they not? So that was one of the big questions that was on the slate when I came in as chairman at the beginning of 2016. At the same time, what we've been trying to do is work through using the new conceptual framework, which we approved in late 2014, through the very significant standards that the ISB has issued on financial instruments, on leases, on measurement, fair value, and also on revenue. And all of those are big issues for the public sector. So we've been trying to work through balancing what are the public sector specifics versus what are the, the real commonalities. And I think if you look at financial instruments and leases, you see a lot of the same things there. So we've worked through those. We have two relatively new standards, IPSAS 41 on financial instruments, the new standard on leases that we approved this year. And I think those reinforce the commonalities. If you look at the other areas that we are now coming towards the end of, measurement is very important, because in some areas government has assets that it can sell. It doesn't have to go through regulatory hoops and so on. In that case, fair value as defined by ISB is absolutely right. But in other areas where it's providing services like schools, hospitals, roads and so on, not in a market context, actually that's much harder. And that's really where we're working this through at the moment. We hope to come to some answers finally in December, which will link then with particular public sector issues like how do you value heritage. So, and then revenue, similarly, we are coming towards the end of that project, and we're also looking at it alongside the payments and the grants that governments make, which of course they've been making in huge volumes during the pandemic. Quite often what you find is they get money in, maybe from an international organisation as a grant. The organisation that gives that, be it the UN system, which use our standards, that's expenditure for them potentially. It's revenue when government receives it, then it passes it on through the delivery chain. So we've been trying to make sure that we have coherent standards that will help with that cascade. So I think in terms of, those are really important standards that we will come to the end of in the next, well, hopefully with measurements in December. Revenue may take, we may need some further consultation on that, but I think those are important areas. We're also picking up natural resources at the moment, which is an area that goes across both financial reporting and into sustainability reporting. And that is hugely important for a lot of developing nations because they have a lot of resources, be that subsoil assets, natural resources, water is becoming an important issue. And to help people making those decisions going forward, they really need high quality audited information to make those decisions. And then how do you use that in the context of financial performance? So again, we have another project on that. So I would say, you know, financial management is always complex, but it's really super important in terms of how those resources are being used. And that's where I think we are really making very good progress now towards that sort of, what I would call the sort of really reasonably complete suite of information that governments can then use both for decision making and accountability that will address the challenges that they now face.
Yeah. Moving on from the accounting, you know, from whether it is a cash basis or accrual basis, one of the most important areas facing governments today is the issue around climate change and sustainability. Let us inquire a little bit into the India experience on this. Srini, what does sustainability mean for India? And do you believe that we have reliable data around climate change for the government to make decisions?
That's a very interesting question. Thank you for asking me this question. And usually governments don't ask you. At this juncture, I'm reminded of the famous incident when Ronald Reagan was asked, how is government going to solve the problem? He said, please, government is the problem. What do you think government will solve the problem? Usually government is looked upon as a problem creator. We've moved on from that to significantly when we looked at COVID and looked at government providing solutions. Sustainability is a very, it's a happening topic now. People are talking about it all over the world. What does sustainability mean for India? It's slightly different. You might have heard our Prime Minister speak both in United Nations and in COP. Sustainability to sustainability-based reporting standards look at sustainability as a kind of risk mitigation for their operations as to what can be done to have business as usual continue when things get hot. In India, sustainability is different. Sustainability is looked upon as a virtue in itself as to how the world can live well. It's a kind of a wellness, kind of a sustainability, which is sometimes talked about in New Zealand when they talk about wellness index and they talk about integrated reporting of wellness. So for India, sustainability means that all the countries live together in happiness, which is very important voice coming from a country like India, because we have 17% of world's population and we do about 5% of world's emissions. And you know, we have a long way to go up the developmental ladder to provide the basic services to all our people. Despite that, we speak about sustainability in this context. In that context, you would have heard the famous Panchamrit. In Indian mythology, Panchamrit is nectar of the gods, which has got 5 elements. The sustainability Panchamrit that was served up by India during COP26 fixed up a target of net zero carbon in 2070 and had 4 elements leading up to that target. We said by 2030, we would reduce the carbon emissions by 1 billion tons. We said we'll use 50% of our energy by renewables. We said we'll make 500 gigawatts of energy through renewables. And we said we'll reduce the carbon intensity for development by about 45%. Carbon intensity is the maximum in all the places where infrastructure is built. The biggest, most carbon-intensive industries in the world include cement, include steel, which is the essential building blocks for a developing country. Despite that, we have decided to take the hard route and have both development and sustainability, because we believe that sustainability, if it is imperiled, will be a threat to everybody, will be a threat to the developing world and the developed world. So we need to, climate change is happening not only in countries like India, not only are we facing typhoons, you have temperatures going up in Europe, you have unseasonal typhoons in Florida. I mean, it happens all over the world and we've got to be in it together. It was put in a very poetic fashion by the previous issue of Economist, if people, if any of you happen to read it, where it asked, can we do 1.5 degrees centigrade, which was the promise we made ourselves in Paris, that we'll bring it down by 1.5 centigrade. We'll not let it rise beyond 1.5. We said we are not going to bring down the global temperature. We are trying to stop it from going beyond 1.5. It said there should be give, otherwise we'll bake. So that's it. It's not give and take. It is give or we'll bake is the situation as far as sustainability is concerned. And in order to do that, we have started in some way that one of the major things to do sustainability as accountants, you know, as Srini so eloquently explained, unless you measure something, you're not able to monitor that at all. So we need to measure what is happening with regard to sustainability. Ian mentioned that natural resources, and it's very important for developing countries. So you would be happy to know that we made a beginning in that respect. We've got the natural resource accounts done for the entire country, for all the 28 states which own the natural resources, for about 101 minerals and 4 fossil fuels, which tracked their reserves, which track what can be exploited, which track the usage, which try to put in a number for the usage. To allow for informed decision making, if we have to do net zero, we need to know how much of minerals that we're using, and we were also measuring the greenhouse emissions, greenhouse gases. With all this, we produced a compendium which we gave it to policymakers, which will help in evidence-based decision making. If we have to do net zero by 2070, we should be on a glide path from now. And in order to do that, we need to know what are we taking out, at what cost are we taking out. This is a precursor to a 4-stage process, which we intend combining our financial accounts along with our commodity, natural resource accounts, if what have you. And we are trying to do an integrated accounts, which is, and green GDP, which is the Indian vision of trying to help ourselves achieve sustainability. And if 17% of world population achieves sustainability, then it would probably be a good thing going forward. Then we can hope for, containing the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees centigrade.
Sure, right. Impressive. Joseph, we spoke about accrual accounting. What do you think are the challenges for the public sector to move to accrual accounting, and what do you think professional accounting organizations can do to help accrual accounting be more popular? The statistics that we have seen is only about 30% of the countries today follow accrual accounting. Another 40% of them are moving towards accrual accounting, but that's still a very low percentage at this stage of our evolution as the world. So Joseph, what are your views on accrual accounting?
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think the challenges with migrating or implementing accrual accounting are quite huge. So governments around the world are pretty much used to a cash-based accounting mechanism. So they've been doing this for tens, hundreds of years, right? So one of the key challenges will be in terms of quality of data. So for most governments, parastatals, agencies, ministries, they've not been gathering the data required to quantify what the assets will be, the liabilities, adequate estimates around what will be depreciation, amortization charge, or even understanding what the legal components or other liabilities outside of financial liabilities. And you touched on it here when you talked about derivatives as an example, right? Derivatives usually might not be captured. You need to have understanding of those complex financial instruments and capture them in the financial statement. So I think we need to be clear that the challenges are huge. Sometimes also you don't have that sponsorship. The political will does not exist there. So compared to private sector, where you've got most times a stable, most times, not all the times, most times you've got that stable continuity in leadership. For some governments, because of democratic principles and otherwise, you find that leadership tends to change frequently. We've seen examples in countries like the UK, Australia. We've had our own episodes of changes in prime minister appointments. Those create the uncertainty also for reporting. So where you have different governments coming up with different predisposition or policies, it impacts that. Also, there are challenges around the skill sets. Capacity building remains critical there. And that's where the PO comes in, right? So the Membership Obligation Act, Set 5, sets the expectation that professional accounting bodies should support the implementation and adaptation or adoption of IPSAS. So you find that a number of the PAOs around the world are playing leading roles, ensuring that capacity building support for the public sector finance system to leverage the skills and the tools that is needed. For ACCA, we've been playing a very pivotal role in this area. For the last 12 years, we've been organizing an annual virtual conference for the public sector. So this year we would have the 12th edition, December 2nd. I'll encourage you to look online, participate in that. Usually we have tens of thousands of people sign on from around the world to participate. And there we encourage and also introduce approach to implementation of accrual-based accounting. We also work with other partners like IFAC and IPSASB to really look at what are the steps to implementing accrual accounting. One of the recent works we've done is a global guide to professionalization in the public sector. And that was released on the 17th of November. I would encourage you to also pick this guide. It helps you, it spells out what is needed to move or transition to accrual accounting. So we've also played key roles in capacity building. So from countries such as Malawi, Ecuador, Nigeria, ACCA has helped the government in providing that capacity building to ensure that finance professionals understand the skills and have the competence to deliver on accrual accounting.
Sure.
Thank you.
And Ian, if I ask you, what would be your top 2 asks for better implementation of accrual accounting or more support for accrual accounting? What are the top 2 initiatives you would expect?
So, I mean, in terms of implementation of accrual accounting, I would absolutely endorse, your comments in terms of professional capacity building. But I think in terms of successful use of accrual information, it's not just about the finance profession. Really, to get the value from accrual implementation, you actually need to have that information used for management purposes. I think that's back to what everybody's said so far. And so what that means is you need the information used for budgeting purposes, for monitoring purposes. And I think that's where partly it shifts the function of finance to, away from, if you like, being the bean counters, to actually really being able to understand the challenges that the organisations they're working in are facing, and then work with the rest of the organisation to actually support them in finding solutions within the overall financial envelope, and having that better understanding of not only what the current year budget is, but what the future requirements are going to be in terms of management of the asset base and so on. And to do that, they don't necessarily need to be experts in IPSAS, but what they do need to be is, really understand what financial management can do for them and the questions that they need to ask their financial managers. And I think it's that awareness, and I think that's another area where PAOs can really play a very good role, is in that, if you like, that broader financial education, which is really important, so that truly what gets measured gets managed, and the broader information, the broader organisation really takes ownership of public financial management. This isn't just for accountants. This is about how the business is managed and governed, and I think that's really what you're looking for. And so I think there's a skills side to it. I think it's also recognising that, which goes with this point about it's not just about implementing accrual reporting, it's about the way in which the public finances are planned and managed, and you need that really to go throughout the system. And certainly if I reflect on one of the learnings from my own experience in implementing the consolidated whole of government accounts for the UK, it was that it's not enough to just get good high quality accrual reporting. The frameworks have to be consistent, and so the mistake I think we made in the UK was, yes, we implemented accrual reporting, we even allowed in the legislation for accrual budgeting, but we didn't tie those frameworks together to eliminate differences, because wherever you get differences you get problems with data quality, and you get that, well, what am I being held to account for? So in the UK we had parliamentary appropriations on one basis, we had accrual budgets on another basis, we had accounts on a third basis, and those were also different in many cases to the fiscal statistics that were used for macroeconomic management. So what we had to do was actually go through a second phase of actually tying all that together, and that actually simplifies the systems challenges.
What I hear you say, Ian, two important messages I take from what you said is, one is greater use of data which is coming out of these systems. That is important, and use it in budgeting and otherwise it becomes only an accounting exercise but not used for decision making. And the second is greater awareness across the organization on IPSAS and the complexities around that. I think that makes a lot of sense. But you know, we are on this focus on accrual accounting, and we believe accrual accounting leads to transparency and accountability, but that is not sufficient. Let me ask you, Srini, that what do you think are the features beyond accrual accounting? What adds to transparency and accountability to both of you, actually?
Thank you. And this is a fascinating conversation on the accrual accounting. Let me just take a step back and ask you, when you think of government taxing us and spending money, what comes to your mind? What do you think is the problem? If you ask me, having seen how public finance systems are working in many developing countries particularly, to me, the biggest challenge is Parliament or the legislature giving money means performance. Spending money by executive means performance. How it is spent, what is the value for money in it, what is the level of risks of fraud, corruption, inefficiency, and wastage in that is often not on the radar. And this becomes a kind of a major challenge, particularly in government context in many countries, which governments are trying to address. Let me talk about two specific aspects which can change the game. First, public procurement. Recently, we did a study. What we noticed is it's $3 trillion US, which practically means 3 lakh crore US dollars is wasted every year on government procurements globally. Now, where is this money going? Had it been put to use, it would all have gone to service delivery for efficient services to citizens. 6 out of 10 countries, if we look at the global report on PFM by PEFA, 6 out of 10 countries, they use non-competitive measures, single sourcing and other measures for in excess of 40% of their procurement. It means inefficiencies and risks are built into it, and this is one area which can really transform in terms of the amount of value it can generate once we fix this, and finance professionals are extremely important. Second aspect is public investment. What in private sector we call capital investment, or the kind of an investments. In public sector, you look at like roads, buildings, and all. Now, public sector, there are two problems you see globally in developing countries particularly. What is the space really for public investment, capital investments in government? Many countries, most of government expenditure is salaries, interest and debt service. You are left with small amount. Further, there are commitments to be paid. And in that, these days, the increasing trend of freebies where recurrent expenditure is going on freebies, the space you have is so low, and the value and the way the public investment management decisions are made, which is a great strain. And that, again, the global report on PEFA, public financial management, indicates that globally, countries have been doing pretty weak on public investment management. Asset registers are not there. Can any of us in a company environment go perhaps conduct an audit and say there is no asset register and not qualify and come back? Asset registers don't exist, and practically it's not only for the public, even internally in many countries, the government is unable to manage its own assets very well. If these two are resolved, that's a major progress. I'm super delighted to listen from Mr. Srinivasan that India has done national resource accounting. World over, this problem is its asset register creation itself is a challenge, and natural resource asset accounting, very few countries were able to do. And I heartily congratulate the Government Accounting Standards Board for this remarkable job. Natural resource accounting, taking care of our planet for all times to come. So to conclude my response on this, it's essentially efficiency, service delivery, public financial management, linking it with how well it affects the citizen, and what's the value for money spent by the government. These two, if we improve, and with accounting profession's support, I think it will be a transformative way forward for us.
Excellent. Srini, would you like to respond?
Yeah, I would like to add, first of all, I would like to thank Srini for his generous compliment on natural resource accounting. Unfortunately, it's like a curate's egg. We have good parts and bad parts. While we have done the difficult part of natural resource accounting, asset accounting, we have not done the easier part of doing the accrual and having asset accounts, I should confess. Indian accounts is government accounts, modified cash. We have the hard part, the liabilities are in, the financial liabilities are taken care of, but the financial assets are not taken care of, and even physical manufactured, built assets are not taken care of. And Srini also had the confusion between two Srinivas. Okay, I'll call him Srinivas. Srinivas also had a point that the incentivization for government is different. The executive feels that its business is to spend money. The political executive feels that its business is to provide for a budget. So where is the incentive for spending it wisely and finding out whether you got bang for the buck? That's a problem in government. Fortunately, it's a problem in government for people like me, because we make our living in finding out whether they spent it wisely or not. If they had not, then I would be out of a job. So I'm glad in some ways it's happening, but it's a big challenge for us to find out whether the money has been spent properly. That is the key challenge in government. So besides accrual accounting, as Sudhir put it, we need something else, something extra to ensure either intelligent use of that by the management to ensure that you get to achieve your objectives. In India, there has been a lot of progress in that, fortunately. Most of you would have heard of the JAM Trinity, the Jan Dhan accounts. Would you believe it? We had opened 250 million accounts for the unbanked in India. That is equal to the population of the entire continental United States of America. And then after that, you had a billion biometric identifying Aadhaar issued literally for every person living in India. Mind you, not for every Indian alone, every resident in India. Number two. Number three, you know our mobile penetration, most often than not, it's a problem. It'll be ringing somewhere or other, it'll be ringing all the time. We have more than 1 billion mobiles going up and more than 1 billion smartphones being sold in a year. All these three did what? We do about 1 billion transactions, we do 1 million transactions a day. In fact, the number of digital transactions that is done in India exceeds the total annual transactions which is done by all the major credit card producers, what we do in a month. So this has facilitated the government to cut down the waste to a large extent. You would have heard of term direct benefit transfer. So most of the social sector payments, the pensions and things like that have been done directly into the accounts of the people. How did it impact government finances? It improved public financial management, it cut down the waste, and we also had electronic. Now it's mandatory for government to buy even a pencil through our, what we call GEM, the Government Electronic Marketplace. So the public procurement has been cleaned up quite a bit, and the cash transfers are going through electronic means, reducing the famous wastage. One Prime Minister said, for every rupee spent in India, only 26 paise reaches the intended beneficiary. So we have kind of cleaned up these things. So besides accrual accounting, we need measures to use that numbers intelligently. So I would term it, from a PFM perspective, we would be moving to public management. I would probably drop the word financial. We have to do public management in the broadest possible sense, using all the tools that we have at our command. But that is not to say we don't need accrual accounting. We do need it. Hopefully, someday, maybe the next time when the conference rolls around to India, I would be standing here and talking about implementation of accrual accounting in Indian government systems too. But yes, that is my take on the subject. Thank you.
Sure. That's interesting. I think let's move. We discuss the importance of public finance management, the scope of public finance management, which is accounting, sustainability, climate change. I think these are adding complexities. Ian spoke about how the IPSAs have kept pace to respond to these complexities. Let's move to what might interest this audience, and which is about the external scrutiny and audit of the public finance management. And I know, Srinivas, you look at this very closely, both at the World Bank and at PEFA. And can you tell us about your experience on the external scrutiny and audit of the public finance management?
Thank you so much, Sudhir. So if you look at the cycle, eventually, how is the government accountable to all of us in most of the democratic structures? It is through the structure of parliamentary accountability over executive. So the audit report, which goes to the parliament, the action taken on the audit report. So this we see as an area which can really significantly improve. Unless the parliament holds the executive accountable through the public accounts committee structure very effectively, this cycle is not complete. Now, if we look at the global report on PFM, what it says is 9 in 10 countries, legislative scrutiny of the audit reports. Audit puts up a great report, legislature reviewing that and making recommendations and following up action on the recommendations. That's pretty weak. That's one area probably which one can improve upon. Second, I would also like to mention the internal audit. Lot of us from the we all started from the private sector. Some like me moved to the public sector. I started it as a partner in a firm of chartered accountants in India, then moved to the government and then moved to the World Bank. So when I started, for me, in the private sector, internal audit is so important. Now in governments globally, in developing countries, internal audit is extremely weak. That puts also pressure on the Supreme Audit Institution, the Auditor General, to deliver. So strengthening internal audit could be another area where the accounting profession can really significantly contribute to the government. Last I would mention would be like right now at the end of COVID-19, as we are coming out of the pandemic, the preparedness to the next pandemic is the most important. What we saw during COVID-19 is countries which have strong emergency prepared provisions for public financial management systems, crisis budgeting tools, making sure that when money is spent, for example, in COVID-19, most countries lowered their controls. Now, lowering control means speed is ensured. They were able to deliver with speed. Now, does it mean, is the verdict really out, jury really out? Are we sitting on a time bomb globally that major scams and irregularities are still to be unearthed because of loss of audit trail, because of the transactions during COVID-19? A lot of agencies created, countries created systems outside those normal public financial management systems, ring-fenced funds which not covered in the public financial management system. How do you ensure control and accountability to that? When a new crisis hits, these are the areas which are going to be extremely important, and the time has already started for us to prepare for the new crisis. There's no time to waste.
Yeah, but I think the essence of high quality PFM will eventually rest in the quality of talent that we have coming into the PFM. And Joseph, if I can ask you, can you tell us about the new professionalization guide that ACCA has jointly launched with the IFAC?
Thank you. So on the 17th of November, like I mentioned, IFAC and ACCA jointly launched the Global Guide to Professionalization, and focusing on the public sector finance space. I think we've just listened to a number of accountants and our members globally where they've called for a stronger case for upskilling and professionalization in the public sector space. And so we're very excited about this piece of work, and I'll encourage you to go online and download a piece of this. But there are three key areas we articulated from this report. The first one was to outline globally, what does professionalization mean for the public sector finance space? The second one was to also articulate the benefits. What are the benefits to the individual? What are the benefits to the economy? What are the benefits to government when there's adequate professionalization embedded in our public sector finance space? And the third one was to also develop a roadmap. What would it look like? You know, from political will, like I mentioned earlier, to identifying what the gaps are to adoption, implementation, and continuous learning. So these are the three key areas we focused on in the report, outlining what professionalization means, articulating the benefits, as well as providing a roadmap for implementation. Thank you.
Sure. Excellent. So coming to the Supreme Audit Institution in India, Srini, and you have, I think, some very good practices over here. We heard that the global experience and many of the self-assessments countries made showed a lot of need for improvement, but you've done some things very remarkable in the institution in India. Would you like to give us some highlights of the C&AG in India?
Thank you, Sudhir. That's an invitation for a plug for ourselves. I'm happy doing it. So in any case, you know, it is not to say we do not have problems. As Srinivas put it, we have problems about how many of the reports reach the Public Accounts Committee, how many gets considered. But I would really think that that is only the tip of the iceberg, which is visible. There are a lot of reports which go directly to the executive. There's oftentimes executives work on them and then they make changes, which is helpful going forward. It's probably a useful aid to management. But what are the things which makes the C&AG of India effective? One is the constitutional mandate, which is very strong, very independent, and absolutely not beholden to anybody. I can do what I really feel like. I don't have to answer to any political executive or anybody else. Number two, as you had put it, talent. Talent is a huge problem these days. Every manager here would know that getting talent. Fortunately, C&AG of India was blessed with talent. In fact, you know, our talent included a Nobel laureate in physics. Sir C.V. Raman was an assistant accountant general. He started life in C&AG of India. And talent includes people like Srinivas, whom we have kindly lent to World Bank to do PEFA assessments for the rest of the world. So that's another thing. The third thing is very strong processes, which has been honed over 100 years, which make us a little conservative, a little difficult to work with, keep on demanding papers. There's usually a famous joke. Somebody came, a pensioner came and said that, you know, pensioner has to prove that he's alive. So he came and gave a certificate for the month of March saying, I'm alive, and the auditor asked him, what about February? So that's what people talk to us about. But in a way, our insistence on processes and documentation really keeps us on the straight and narrow where we can defend ourselves. And now, in keeping with the times, like COVID, we have started the concept of agile audit, where we respond to challenges. We try and have a process where we can respond to pandemics like never before, work with the government on a more concurrent basis, especially the emergency authorizations that he was talking about when there is a problem. So with this, we are kind of there, but I won't say that nothing is perfect. We've got to keep working at it. We've got to improve. And one of the things we are doing is to improve our public outreach, thereby getting the public as a stakeholder who will put pressure on the political executive to act on the audit reports. Is a kind of a vision that we have to improve ourselves.
Sure. Excellent. I think one of the areas that would probably interest this audience is how there can be a better collaboration between the private sector and the public sector in public finance management. And we can extend that to both private sector and also to professional accounting organizations. And I'll put that question to all the panelists. Ian, I can start with you on the collaboration between the private sector and public sector. How do you see this can pan out? What do you think can be done? And I'll request all the panelists to, in brief, probably give your points of view.
So, I mean, looking at it, I've seen this from a number of different angles, because early in my career, I trained and worked in the public sector practice of PwC. Then I moved to the UK Treasury for about 10 years. And more recently, I've worked in the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy. So I've seen this from a PAO perspective. And I think, you know, the answer is no one of those, you know, areas actually has the monopoly on the knowledge. Actually, they all you need to bring them together. So I think, you know, picking up on, for example, what can PAOs provide in terms of training and working with government, I think that's a really important role. But in some respects, actually, that challenges a lot of the PAOs around the world in terms of being very much focused on private sector audit and issues. So I think there's a growth role there. Certainly, government needs professional skills that you get from private sector organisations, I think, to begin with, just because there's a capacity issue and there's a lot of challenges in terms of data, the sort of installations of the systems that you require, in terms of data collection, in terms of help with designing the new processes and so on that you need. And you need that skills transfer. So it's not that you want that implementation to happen and then, you know, the consultant goes away. You need that skills transfer. So I think that's part of the equation. And also, you know, I think it's very interesting, you know, the challenges that accrual implementation gives the audit profession, because certainly, you know, there are, you know, as Srinivasan described, there are some very particular issues that you have in public audit, regardless of whether you're on cash or accrual. But if you move to accrual, then not only do you need capacity development within government departments, but you need it amongst the auditors as well, because, you know, understanding what accrual reporting involves, and then actually how you come to the judgments and so on, that's something that in a cash environment you don't have that experience. And it's interesting, I did a joint presentation with the guy who was my auditor when I was doing whole of government accounts, and one of the things I hadn't realised at all was the fact that he said that the National Audit Office in the UK, one of the challenges they had was to really get a culture of peer review going within the organisation, because you needed to make sure that the judgments that were being formed on departments, say, you know, defence, were consistent with health and so on. And you know, so that that challenge came in, and I think that's where you can learn from the challenges that the private sector firms have when they're doing audits. And certainly, although it's not without its challenges, but one of the things that I think actually helped provide challenge on both sides when I was in the UK was actually the practice of contracting out some of the public sector audits to the private sector, and that engendered learning on both sides. And certainly I saw that undertaking audits. It challenged me working for the National Audit Office to understand their perspective and to deal with the regularity side of audits. But equally, I think we actually help with the transfer. So I think, you know, there's a lot that needs to happen, and you can't do it in silos. It involves working together, and it involves working together in many different capacities over the period. And it's not just implementation, it's through after that to get that transfer going continuously.
Sure. Srinivas, do you see enough of this happen?
Thanks. It happens, but I can also use this opportunity to mention to all my friends who are still wondering, what is this public sector thing, government thing? We are in the private sector. Let me mention, this is a huge untapped potential for everyone, and governments cannot do without the accounting profession. It is this profession which is going to play the key as we move forward. I'll refer also to the small article I wrote in the CA journal for the World Congress. So I argued to say the three players in public financial management, economists, accountants, and public policy experts, they should come together. PEFA, which is the PFM cycle, has 94 dimensions. 63 of them very directly relate to accounting profession. Colleagues, it is accounting profession which is going to make it happen, and it is this profession which is in the fulcrum. And as we move forward, I see it happening. ACCA working strongly to equip accounting profession with skills for public sector. ICON, Nigeria Institute of Chartered Accountants, doing an accountability index. Institute of Chartered Accountants of India issuing accounting standards for local bodies. Lot is happening, and this is wonderful time to come. Our time to be at the core of public finances and public management is today. As accountants, let's make it happen, friends.
Srini, do you want to add to that?
I would agree with Srinivas. As they say, war is too important to be left to the generals. Similarly, public financial management is too important to be left only to the government. We need partners. We need professional accounting organizations to be full-fledged partners in the endeavor. And see, for example, in India today, you have more than 2 lakh village panchayats, and they all have accrual-based accounting systems, and they need to be audited. The capacity is just not available with the government alone to do the audit of those institutions. So you need to have a partnership with government. Unfortunately, there's a kind of information asymmetry in this game between the professional accounting organizations and the government PFM systems. Kind of operates in silos. But at some point, we need to come together to make it happen. And once when that happens, then the gainer will be the ordinary citizen of the country who would have access to very professional accounting and assurance services, which will help the governments deliver their services to the citizens better.
Sure. And Joseph, would you like to have the last word?
Sure. If I may add to that, I think there are two core areas where we can have collaboration between private sector and public sector. The first area would be around industry focus groups. So, telecoms, financial services, manufacturing, mining, what have you. Rather than have it predominantly private sector driven, we could have collaboration between regulators or government departments or agencies or ministries, because the challenges there and the opportunities are similar. And so that's potentially an area of collaboration. The second one would be around critical or major themes. So we talk about sustainability or climate crisis or change. We talk about cyber security and all of those issues. Those are common themes that you need both private sector and public sector insights, discussion, deliberations to come up with essential ways to move forward. So if you look at climate crisis, you can't solve it as government alone without how it's going to be implemented. You've seen all of this silo thinking. So the government will say, oh, we need by 2050 net zero. How do you implement that? The private sector is not across it. So the US by 2050 wants half of the cars to be EV. How is that going to happen? Is supply chain integrated into that? Do you have the skill set? Do you have the resources to make that happen? So you see that by working in silos, that we're creating gaps that we need to bridge. So two core areas where we can have collaboration, industry focus groups, private sector, public sector working together along major themes. Cybersecurity, we've seen examples in places like Australia where people's private information are being hijacked and sold by hackers. So you can't just leave that to the government. Private sectors have this insight, they've got skill set that can be leveraged by both the public and private sector. So I think by working on across this, we can get some leverage in terms of collaboration. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Joseph. I think that was one of the most fascinating panel discussions I have been in. I must say that on this topic, you would not have a more eminent panel around the world, So a big round of applause to these eminent individuals. You have the World Bank, you have the Supreme Audit Institution, you have the standard setter, and you have the professional, accounting certifier, in that sense, the ACCA. So you wouldn't have a better panel anywhere on the world on this topic. So thank you, gentlemen, for those insights. My closing words would be that I think public finance management, as I mentioned earlier, is now of increasing importance. It's as, I think some of the numbers that Srinivas gave earlier of how it can impact public life very significantly. And as accountants, one of the biggest challenges that we have is we are often looking for purpose. And I feel that there can be no better example of purpose than serving the public sector and working with the public sector. So I find that this is a fascinating opportunity for us to uplift the life of our citizens and to perform an activity with purpose. So thank you again, gentlemen, and thank you all for a patient listening. Thank you. We'll close the panel. Yeah, right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone in the panel. We like to express our thanks to you and felicitate by giving a memento. I'd like to request CA Dr. Sanjeev Kumar Singhal, respected Central Council member ICI, to please come up on the stage. And present memento to CA Sudhir Soni, Head of Audit, BSR and Company. Thank you very much, sir, for moderating the session. Public sector finances is very important. It is our money, taxpayers' money. for sharing the challenges that comes to move to accrual accounting. Thank you. Thank you everyone for doing the honors. And after this very important session on public sector priorities, I'm very happy to announce that one of the very important public sector person is going to join us virtually in just a bit, and I'm sure we would be very keen to hear him. Happy to share that in about 15 minutes from now, we will be joined virtually by Dr. Bhagwat Kishan Rao Karad. He is the Union Minister of State for Finance, Government of India. He'll be joining us virtually in about 15 minutes, so it'll be interesting to see and hear the Honorable Minister's comments. But before that, we will set up the stage for a cultural performance. Would you all like to have a cultural performance coming your way? Yes? So before we go to the Union Minister of State Finance virtually in about 15 minutes, what we are presenting now for you will be a visual feast. This is the Prince Dance Group. That will be presenting in a short while. So this evening we will have the visual feast where Prince Dance Group is going to present the cultural program. But right now, let's just take a few minutes of break. And then, as I said, in about 10 to 15 minutes, we'll be joined by the Honorable Minister of State for Finance, Government of India.